From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have on the programme: Saving Brexit. UK Prime Minister Theresa May makes her last pitch before a critical vote. Lesson learned: what responsibility does Europe bear if the UK crashes out of the EU? Uniting the right, the future of populism as Italy and Poland strategize ahead of European elections. American snub, should Europe retaliate after being unfriended by US President Donald Trump? And end of an era. After almost 4 decades, Europe's longest-serving MEP could be on the way out. Well, it is time to meet our panel for tonight. First of all, I'm joined by Darren McCaffrey, our political editor here at Euronews. Darren, which of these stories are you watching
Looking
closely?
at this diplomatic spat between Washington and Brussels that's emerged in the last 24 hours. It's a bit like, Tessa, I suppose, on Facebook, when you go from being in a relationship to it's complicated without actually telling the other person. Let me tell you, it's gone down like a bucket of coal sick here in Brussels, what Donald Trump has done.
Quite a snub there. All right, and also joining us is Hans-Olaf Henkel. He's a German MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformists. Hans, which of these stories are you watching closely?
Well, I'm just watching since 9 months almost exclusively what happens on Brexit, with the hope that it will not happen.
All right. And also joining us is Marian Harkin. She's an Irish MEP with the ALDE Group. Marian, which are you watching?
Well, I too, like Hans, am obsessed with Brexit. The British Parliament debates are on in my office. I'm watching them, and I'm very interested in today's vote and what that means for Brexit as we go forward.
OK, a lot of interest in Brexit here, and that's exactly where we are starting today, because less than 24 hours after a humiliating defeat tonight, Theresa May is desperately trying to avoid another one in exactly 1 week. Well, MPs have begun debating a Brexit deal with the EU ahead of a critical vote. And if all of this sounds a little too familiar, well, that's because it is. Politicians did the same thing last month before May abruptly delayed the vote to avoid certain defeat. And now the UK Prime Minister, she's trying once again to convince Parliament and her own party to stand behind her. And she answered questions from the opposition earlier today.
The Prime Minister has been recklessly wasting time, holding the country to ransom with the threat of no deal in a desperate attempt to blackmail MPs to vote for her hopelessly unpopular deal.
Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman can say what he likes about no deal, but he opposes any deal that the government has negotiated with the European Union. He opposes the deal. He opposes the deal that the EU say is the only deal, and that leaves him with no deal. The only way to avoid no deal is to vote for the deal.
All right, well, let's start first in London and get the view from there. A lot going on, definitely. I'm going to bring in our Euronews correspondent, Vincent McAvin. He's been following the debate live today. Vincent, you know, we already heard that the UK government has suffered a defeat already after an amendment was voted in. Tell us about this and what this means for Theresa May.
Good evening, Tessa. Well, after that PMQ session, the government suffered its second defeat within 24 hours, this time on a measure which time limits her after her likely losing the meaningful vote, her vote next Tuesday evening on her withdrawal agreement. She thought that she would then have 21 days in order to come back to the House of Commons with her plan B. Now that has been fast-tracked. She will only have 3 days after losing the vote, and this is the second within 24 hours. The one that she lost last night as well means that she has now lost more votes as her time in Prime Minister than Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, John Major, David Cameron, Gordon Brown all put together. So extraordinary times here in British politics. And one of the people who helped draft the amendments that led to both those defeats is the Liberal Democrat MP Tom Brake. Tom, can you just take us first through today's defeat for the government? What does this mean and why did you do it?
Well, what it means is that the Prime Minister can't kick the can down the road for as long as perhaps she was intending doing. The idea that after a defeat next Tuesday on her deal, which I think, as you said, is increasingly likely, that she would then spend up to 21 days considering what she was going to do next, when theoretically we could crash out of the European Union on the 29th of March, is something that Parliament was not willing to accept. So this will require her to come back if she loses her motion next Tuesday, back to Parliament within 3 working days to set out what she intends doing next.
And the defeat last night as well on the amendment that you helped draft, can you explain that to viewers? How will that impact what she can and can't do now?
Well, the amendments, there are a number of amendments, including a Liberal Democrat amendment tabled last night, and the purposes of those were to rule out no deal, to make it very clear to the Prime Minister that she does not have a majority in Parliament who would support what she's offering as the alternative to her deal. Every time the Prime Minister speaks about her deal, she says, if you don't want my deal, it's no deal that you're going to get instead. Well, Parliament made it very clear yesterday that that is unacceptable. We will not accept no deal as an alternative because we know what the impact of no deal could be. The government are making preparations for that at the moment. And frankly, it's shocking and alarming.
So the option of no deal now seems pretty much off the table for the Prime Minister. A week from now, when it seems likely she'll have lost this vote on her deal, where are we then? What do you think? Is it a second referendum? Is it a general election? Will she pause Article 50? What possibly can she do?
Well, she has a very limited number of options. Now, I don't think she will press no deal. She can't. Parliament has said no. She cannot really go back to the European Union and seek a completely fresh set of negotiations. So really, she can't pause Article 50 for that purpose. So I think she ends up with a people's vote as really being the only choice that she can now make. If she believes, as she does, as she's repeatedly stated, that her deal is absolutely brilliant and everyone supports it, well, put it to a vote and give people a choice of voting for your deal or voting to remain in the EU.
Well, there we go. Brexiteers have been wanting Parliament to take back control, and it seems they're definitely doing that, but to Theresa May. And whilst all this is going on, Tessa, just remember it's now just 78 days until the UK leaves the European Union, and the Prime Minister has fewer options and a lot less time than she was now expecting. Back to you.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Vincent McAviney and his guests. All right. It seems like, as Vincent was pointing out, that Theresa May's hands are tied now, even more so. Is that what's happening?
Well, certainly her options are narrowing. And I'm really pleased that this amendment went through because it means she has to move forward. As our colleague said, she can't kick the can down the road any longer because time is running out. And I think she hoped she might wear people down. But I mean, this has to move forward. I always said no British Prime Minister would jump off the cliff of no deal Brexit. In fact, it's the British Parliament taking back control and saying we will not approve no deal. Whether that means they go back to the people or they have a general election, I don't know. Options are narrowing, have to be chosen, have to move forward.
So you think that was what she wanted to do, Theresa May wanted to do, was just basically kick the can down the road so that time would eventually run out and that would decide for her?
Yes, I think that's clear. For me, the outcome of these two amendments is that the chances of a second referendum have, in my view, significantly increased. And I think it is also time for Europe to recognize they should actually help those in Britain who want a second referendum. And I think they could do this. And I think they should do this for two reasons. Number one, Britain is very important to the European Union. Let's not forget, just economically, Britain leaving means as if 19 other countries would leave at the same time. So it's a significant blow to the common market, which is the best thing the EU has ever done. And secondly, I think we all remember that David Cameron tried to get some more autonomy for immigration. And if the European Union would now say, look, folks, if you are having a referendum, we may give you some more autonomy over immigration, which meanwhile many other European countries want, then they could influence also the outcome.
Yeah, but Hans, the EU has been really quiet, actually, watching things unfold in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, that is true, but what I really miss here, also in this house... Why? Well, there are a number of reasons. Number one, we have people in this house, I know them, who want Brexit. They want to get rid of the Brits because they are in the way of the United States of Europe. Britain is always the country which has common sense, which is in favor of subsidiarity, against bureaucracy, against centralization. And that is sort of a problem to a few people.
I think just very quickly pick on what Hans was saying. and this is a point that Tony Blair has also made about a second referendum when I interviewed him last month, but the whole point is that the EU is not about the free movement of people. What is the EU about? And the question is that Britain doesn't want, necessarily some further powers on the migration of people. It wants to end the free movement of people.
No.
I mean, that's what Theresa May has argued for.
Wait a minute. I think this is a very important distinction. I, as the ex-head of German industry, am very much in favor of the freedom of movement of people. But remember, when Poland got into the European Union, it was the German government which insisted that for 7 years there should be a restriction of Polish migrants to Germany.
Okay.
Tony Blair was against that. What happened is they went to Britain. So the point
I have to say,
the point I'm making is yes, but there's a possibility to give Britain a special deal.
They made a huge difference to our economy. But coming back to your other point, that there's not a significant majority in this House for Brexit. Yes, there are small numbers.
At the moment, not, but
absolutely
that's,
not.
Marion,
and I think we're afraid to be seen to interfere. I very much wanted, during the referendum, to try to persuade people to vote Remain. But I was concerned that we would be seen to interfere.
So in terms of if there were a second referendum, do you think the EU would act differently this time?
I think Europe's hands are tied to a large extent because any interference will be called out as such. Certainly, as an Irish citizen, as an Irish MEP, I would talk quietly to Irish people behind the scenes. Yes, Europe can make certain general statements. And of course, Cameron, when he came here, before he called a referendum, he did get a number of issues sorted. But before he arrived back in the UK, they were dismissed as if they were nothing. So I do think Europe could make some general statements, not around free movement, and you agree with that, but around the whole issue of migration, and that might help.
Because we're talking about, whether the EU would have any responsibility if
and that is it. And that point may well have to come because ultimately on today's votes, working on the assumption now that Theresa May is going to lose next Tuesday, essentially all the other options, apart from no deal, apart from crashing out, will essentially have to mean either extending Article 50 or rescinding it, because there is not enough time in the calendar, essentially, for certainly a second referendum and almost certainly for a second referendum. Will Europe agree to that? On what terms? And what can they offer will be fascinating. But you're right. Who takes responsibility for this mess? Is it simply down to Britain, or is it down to other political players as well? And that is a question I put to Irish politicians, to Sinn Féin, who've been today meeting Michelle Barnier, and I began by asking Mary Lou McDonald, who's the leader of Sinn Féin, whether she and her party bear some responsibility too.
We've always said that there is an obligation on all parties to be honest, to be honourable, and to engage. But remember this, Brexit is a British creation. We didn't create this. In fact, the people in the north of Ireland, as you know, voted to remain. So the first responsibility to define Brexit lies with the British. The second responsibility that's core for our purposes is the obligations conferred on this British government and any subsequent British administration through the Good Friday Agreement. All of that has to be recognised. I don't want to crash. None of us want a no-deal scenario, but that is in the hands now of the British Prime Minister and British parliamentarians. Let me say this. We do not envisage any hardening of the border on the island of Ireland. That is out of the question. No infrastructure, no hardening of the border. In the event that there is a crash, well, then it will be imperative for the British government to put the constitutional question to the people of Ireland.
And just funny for you, Michelle, there's talk today about giving Stormont a say, but of course Stormont doesn't exist at the moment. Again, don't you have a responsibility to get Stormont back up and going again and give a voice to the people in Northern Ireland who actually voted to remain?
Well, firstly, I would say it's an absolute disgrace that the people of the North are being denied government. But you have to remember the context of why the institutions fail. And actually today marks 2 years since Martin McGuinness resigned. Martin did that as a last resort. He did that because he had no other option. He did that because the DUP continued to deny rights to citizens. The DUP blatantly disrespected and disregarded anyone with an Irish national identity. And the DUP were involved in a financial scandal. And yet then we have today calls for an assembly that doesn't exist to be given a veto in the future. And because of our special and unique circumstances of operating in the assembly, you cannot give a minority view in this case the DUP, a veto to stop any sort of controls or regulations being put in place in the future. That is not acceptable, and it goes against everything about what the institutions are about.
All right, I think, based on what we heard over there, they said that it is a purely Brexit, a purely UK problem. But let's not forget, why? Because why did people vote for Brexit? I think we forget that part of the story. Yes. When David Cameron was was trying to negotiate with the EU, there was a lot of concern about austerity measures, the EU's concern. I mean,
and Hans is right in saying that, this is the second largest economy. It is 65 million people leaving the bloc, and clearly it is part of a wider surge in populism and Euroscepticism across Europe. And Europeans, people in this parliament, need to take some form of responsibility.
So why do you...
Well,
what
look,
do you think?
let me put it this way. The history of Brexit is actually a little bit much longer. I mean, let's face it, what created Farage? Farage had a stage in this parliament here, and he could point to a lot of things. And some of them were right. I always say Britain joined a football club, but Brussels decided to play hockey. So it is actually Britain which said, well, wait a minute, we joined under the basis of the Lisbon Treaty, but you are constantly violating the principles of the treaty by more centralization, by more bureaucracy, by more harmonization, instead of...
It's very easy to use the word bureaucracy. But when the British were asked, what legislation would they want to change? The only one I ever heard was the Working Time Directive. Do they want to change the legislation on the environment? Do they want to change the legislation on health and safety? I mean, that's what that's the bureaucracy that you refer to.
No.
Nobody could say what they wanted to change. And I believe we do need to listen. But what we need to listen to is specifics. What do we want to change? What direction do we want to go in? Not just speak about elites and bureaucracy and terms that don't have meaning.
But this is all true what you say, but I have now witnessed the British people in this parliament, regardless where they are, if they accept the crazy UKIP people, they are always the voice of more common sense.
They are.
Right,
they want more competition, whereas the rest wants harmonization.
Okay.
They want subsidiarity, the others want more Europe.
And the interesting
thing voice is necessary.
Well, and it's interesting that, when you look to Eastern and Southern Europe, there are voices necessarily who are now starting to make that argument too, that they do not want this sense of closer harmonisation of Europe. They want a Europe much more of nation states than of central bureaucracy. And that's where it comes down to that whatever happens next week,
the question is
if this question comes back to Europe and it comes back to extending Article 50 or it comes back to potentially a second referendum, will Europe then realise that it needs to change, or at least appear to change, in order to get back some of those British voters they've lost?
All right, Maria, just very quickly, what are you watching out for the next 6 days?
Well, Brexit. That's as quick as I can
Which
make
point in it?
Well, obviously, after today's vote, next week we'll have the vote in the Parliament. I think we're going to hear more of the same, even though the British government have come up with a paper on Northern Ireland, but that's tinkering around the edges. We have the backstop. It's not going to change. And assurances here or there, I don't think are going to change many minds, if any, in the House of Commons.
But certainly all eyes on what is going to happen next with Brexit and when that vote comes and what it means for Theresa May. All right, another big story that we are watching, we've been following, is that massive hack of German politicians and celebrities last week. It had authorities stumped, well, until now. Alex Morgan and our team in the Cube have the latest on this. Alex?
When it comes to passwords, Tessa, you're probably thinking, like we all have, something easy to remember, something you'll actually recall. Maybe you might think, I know, I'll use I love you, potentially. Or how about a handy little numerical sequence, one that won't slip your mind? Maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is what we are talking about here. It is these passwords, examples given by the German authorities, that allowed a hacker to access the personal information of roughly 1,000 people in Germany. So who are we talking about? Are we talking about some sophisticated organization, a foreign agent? No. Let me tell you who we're talking about. An identity given by the German authorities. We are talking about a 20-year-old student who lived with his parents, doing all this from his computer with no previous conviction, no obvious link to a political cause at all. And what he used, this 20-year-old used, was the weak personal security of politicians and celebrities. We're talking passwords to social media, to email, using that to hack in, to extract information, and then to share it in a masked Twitter account. Now, this, obviously, you can see, we're not talking about the hack of government systems, but look how easily this information was shared by one individual, a student, who the authorities say wasn't fully aware of the implications of his actions. Now, when asked about the motive, this is what we got from the senior prosecutor talking about this. He said the accused said his motivation had been irritation over the public statements given by the politicians and the journalists and the other figures affected. So effectively, this 20-year-old was annoyed. He'd grown up in the digital age, and he was able, on his own, it would seem, to access this information and to share it out. Now, while the German authorities were quite quick to put out statements saying within 48 hours they joined the dots and they got to the bottom of this, you can see it's embarrassing. It is embarrassing for the politicians, for the individuals whose accounts were accessed. And indeed, the chief of staff at the Bundestag said that, well, actually, if one disgruntled student can do this, imagine what could happen in the hands of somebody or a group who are really targeting people. So perhaps the takeaway from all this, Tessa, is individual politicians, in fact, all of us need to double check our passwords. And if in doubt, maybe I love you or 12345, probably not the ones to go for.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and our team in the Cube. I mean, what a twist. There were a lot of speculation about which government or who is responsible, which political party. But I think the bigger question is, with the elections coming up, if a 20-year-old can do this, the problem of cybersecurity is much bigger than we actually imagine it is.
Yeah. I mean, it's very concerning. It's sort of almost impossible to imagine what we can do. On a lighter note, my son is trying to persuade me to get an app on my phone that switches on the lights in my house and the heating. I'm not so sure I'm going to do that now, because that means somebody else might do it. So, but that's just the lighter aspect of it. But it's very concerning. It's all about privacy and how to make sure that the security we have in place, but a lot of it is down to personal security. In other words, simple passwords, easy to access, etc. So as soon as I leave here, I'm going to review my password.
Yeah, but the worst thing is that when every single month you're told you have to change your password, and then you can't remember what you've changed it to. So you have to try and keep it simple. I think, in fact, having to change, it's one of my personal gripes, having to change constantly your password actually increases the risk of cyber insecurity. But yeah, it is a reminder that forget about bricks and mortars these days. If you want to access or steal anything, it is clearly through the web. And as we become more connected as individuals, we are more exposed.
Right. All right, on that note, we have a lot more coming up for you on Raw Politics. Birds of a feather. Italy and Poland talk about uniting the right ahead of European elections. Plus, Sucker Punch, why an online campaign wants to pay a former boxing champ who was caught hitting French police at a protest. All that coming up. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, Italy's Matteo Salvini is in Warsaw today to meet with the leader of the Poland's ruling party. And what is on the agenda? It's an anti-EU alliance ahead of May's European elections. It comes as Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki accused the Brussels of discriminating against certain member states. Now, he made those comments in an exclusive interview with CNBC's Jeff Cutmore when asked why the Polish government has taken aim at France over spending.
People, different countries, different member states are treated quite differently in very similar situations. So this is probably a definition of discrimination, isn't it? While one country has a deficit or budget deficit of 2.4%, another country has a deficit exceeding 3%, which is the Maastricht Treaty criterion, and they are treated differently because of some, other aspects. This has to be really explained to the public, because I talk to my Italian friends and they they are, very upset about this treatment, and people in Poland.
And joining me to delve a little deeper into this potential alliance, we are joined by Georg Mayer, an Austrian MEP from the Freedom Party of Austria and treasurer of the Europe of Nations and Freedom Group here in the Parliament. And still with us is Irish independent MEP Marian Harkin and our political editor Darren McCaffrey. Now, the Foreign Minister of Poland there was raising the idea of discrimination. I mean, is this the reason why there's increasing anti-EU sentiment? I mean,
well, first of all, I don't like the term anti-EU alliance because it is not. Yeah, the question is, we want to change something in the institutions in the European Union, and that's the reason why we try to unite a group as big as possible, of course, that we get power here in the House, and that's the reason why it's absolutely no anti-EU alliance.
So when you say you want to change, what do you want to change?
Well, a lot of things we can change in this House and in the Commission. First of all, we don't want Britain is leaving, and still they want more money from the member states. That's something that Austria said, no, stop it, because you can have some kind of go deeper into your administration and try to save money there. That's one of the biggest things we don't want to support more money to the European Union. First of all, there should be some kind of let's say. How can you say cost reduce and check your own administration where you can save money, because at the end it's money from the European taxpayers.
First of all, I'm glad to hear it's not anti-EU. And you're perfectly entitled, like all of us are in this House, to look at what we think needs to be improved and changed. So you've just cited one item there, less money to the European Union. And that's a perfectly legitimate position. But the question I would ask is, how is the money spent? When that money comes to Brussels, as it were. We look at our social funds, we look at our regional funds, our cohesion funds. We had a discussion just today about the Globalisation Fund, where workers, if they're made redundant, can get money towards upskilling, retraining. So for me, it's not so much about the money, it's how money is spent, that it's well spent. Because the money doesn't belong to the European Union or to the member states, it actually belongs to the citizens who pay the taxes, and it's how money is spent, much more so than who spends it.
I mean, we're getting into specific issues here, as you rightly asked, of what are the issues that you want to change. Yes. But different, you could say far right or right parties in different countries have different issues. Is it really possible or realistic to unite the right, as you say?
Of course. I'm in this business already more than 10 years, and it's always, they say,
there have been many attempts.
How can you unite nationalist parties? But that's not a problem, because we all have the same problems in Europe, in the European Union. We don't want to give more competence to the European Union. We want to get competence back. And that is one of the main goals of all.
But you look at, so let's look at Italy and Poland that we're talking about today, because we've had that meeting. Let's look at migration. I mean, they are on, Italy and Poland are on two different pages.
Or Russia, or when it comes to that.
Yeah, on the issue. So Italy want to essentially see a quota system across the EU, an EU-wide solution. Poland does not want to take part in that at all. So, and that is what the biggest potential issue in Europe today. There's very little unity on that.
Well, I think, of course, this will be the main issue for the next election campaigning, of course. And I think it's not that far away. The positions of the Polish and the Italians are not that far away, as you may think, when it comes to that point. At the moment, we are not working together. The Polish party is sitting in the ECR. We are in the ENF together with the Lega. Yeah? So we have already our basic political program for this period, and there will be, of course, a change in the next period, so that we can get as many parties as possible. And these parties are not right-wing parties or extremist parties. Yeah. These parties, if you want to call them populist parties, because we listen to the people and hear what the people say and what the problems of the people.
That makes the assumption that the rest of us don't. Let me assure you, I listen to the people. I hear what they're saying. And I agree with you on this issue. Migration is a significant issue. And for too long, the sense was the European Union was not in control. And that frightens the hell out of people. But I believe now we are closer to agreement and we are much more in control than we were.
But Marian, I'd like to ask you, though, because you said that that you listen to other politicians do, but the reason that
I listen to people.
Yeah, but the people are saying the reason why they're going to populist parties is because the mainstream politicians don't listen. That's the feeling of the people.
Well, that may be the case, but the people are not just, the whole people are all the citizens of the EU. I mean, different politicians approach their work in different ways. I'm just saying that I listen to what people are saying, and I think you must. And if they have concerns, you have to deal with them. You can't pretend they don't exist. And I think to some extent that has happened a little bit. And I would hope, and I'll finish with this, that in this election, that the real issues that concern people will come to the fore, and that Jörg and myself and everybody else will be asked up front, how do you intend to deal with it? How do you intend to fund it? And who will do it? And give straight answers.
All right. Darren, I want to ask you a broader question on populism and where we're seeing this going.
Yeah, I think two things. First of all, populism's gaining support, but it's not winning majorities everywhere. So clearly, Marian's right when she's saying that politicians have to listen to all of the electorate, not just sometimes the ones that shout loudest. And we do tend to focus on populism a lot. But you're right, there is a wider schism in European politics, which is reflected in kind of, the people who are open to change and open to migration and those that are slightly more closed, but also by the sense of what Europe is. Those that are fighting, and this has been the traditional argument, who want to see a deeper, integrated, more politically bound European Union, and those who happen to be on the right and some on the left, but mostly on the right, who want to see, again, Europe still remain a community, an organisation, a bloc of nation states. And that will continue to be the battle at the next election. It should be noted just on this, finally, on this issue of migration, of course, that even though it continues to dominate politics, the number of migrants to Europe is down massively. It's down to levels that we haven't seen since 2013.
But thanks to the Italian government.
Give me 5 seconds because you're running out of time.
But who want a European quota system that Poland doesn't want?
OK, well, now let us move on now to France, where public support for the Yellow Vest movement we've been seeing for the past few weeks, it's manifesting itself in quite an unusual way. Let's take a look. This, the moment an ex-boxer is filmed raining down punches on a French police officer during the latest round of Yellow Vest protests in Paris. The footage went viral, leading the light heavyweight champion to hand himself into the police. But not before he explained his actions in a video posted online.
Ami gilet jaune, voilà. Je me présente d'être avec Christophe. C'est moi la personne qui a affronté les CRS le samedi 5 janvier. Je suis un gilet jaune. Je suis un gilet jaune. J'ai la colère du peuple qui est en moi. Je vois tous ces présidents, je vois tous ces ministres, je vois tout l'État se gaver, se tromper. Ils sont même pas capables de montrer l'exemple. Ils ne montrent pas l'exemple. Ils se gavent sur notre dos. C'est toujours nous les petits qui payons. Je me suis fait gazer et à un moment la colère est montée en moi. Et oui, j'ai mal réagi. Oui, j'ai mal réagi. Mais je me suis défendu. Et voilà.
Meanwhile, the French Interior Minister stood strong with his police officers.
Je me félicite de la reddition ce matin parce qu'il se savait identifié, traqué de l'individu qui samedi à Paris s'est brutalement attaqué aux gendarmeries engagés sur la passerelle Saint-Laurent.
But that wasn't the end of this story. An online fundraising page sprung up in support of the French boxer. And before it was suspended, more than 100,000 euros had reportedly been raised. The platform insists the funds will only be used for legal fees and that any leftover cash will be returned to donors. Well, you see that public support for a man who was seen on camera beating a police officer. I mean, is that surprising, unexpected, shameful?
Well, I mean, clearly, according to the government, it's absolutely shameful, and they shut down this donation website. And I can at least see the argument why a government would say attacking police and not facing the consequences is not how in a civilised society we can allow ourselves, and clearly it's illegal. However, I mean, 2 or 3 things. First of all, do people get carried away in protests? Not least of all, sometimes the police. Yes, they do. Second of all, he was one man. He was not armed. He was against a police force with batons and tear gas. And third of all, what this I think petition and donations demonstrate is just how angry people are, not just against the government, but also
we go back to that
system.
sentiment, to that feeling of anger that we're seeing across Europe, actually, over different issues. All right, after the break on Raw Politics, adding insult to injury, why Donald Trump downgraded Europe's diplomatic status without even telling Brussels, and should the EU strike back? That's coming up next.
When they say I'm not popular in Europe, I shouldn't be popular in Europe. If I was popular in Europe, I wouldn't be doing my job, because I want Europe to pay. I don't care about Europe. I'm not elected by Europeans. I'm elected by Americans.
Well, that was Donald Trump last week, and as usual, not afraid to speak his mind when it comes to Europe. But it's not all talk. Officials have confirmed that late last year, his administration lowered the status of the European Union's diplomats in the U.S. without even notifying Brussels. The EU went from a member state to an international organization, making diplomats less important and less influential in Washington. And in a letter to Congress, MEPs on the U.S. delegation said this is no way to treat partners. Such moves play into the hands of rival global powers and can only lead to greater fragmentation rather than much needed increased cooperation. Now, together we can address cross-border challenges, yet in order to do so, we need to strengthen and not undermine each other. And joining me now to discuss this is Maria João Rodrigues, a Portuguese MEP who is vice chair of the Socialists and Democrats group, Brian McGuire, a journalist with Euractiv, and still with us, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. All right, when we look at the EU getting downgraded, should the EU be really upset and retaliate?
Look, I really hope this will not happen. This is not very a credible move from the United States. And in fact, the United States, according to the past tradition, knows very well that the European Union is not just an international organization. It is a political entity properly organized as a democratic power. We are based on the European Parliament, elected by European citizens. We have a Council, we have a European Commission as embryon of executive power, combined with the European Council, where all the governments are represented. So it's much stronger than just an international organization. We make European law with many, many implications. So frankly, I think in the end, they will check the situation and they will conclude this is not really...
So should we read a lot more into this, or what is it, a small spat? Or?
Well, it's a small man with a big idea. This is Donald Trump at his best and at his worst. It's a big headline, but it's a school-ground bully who thinks that by showing disfavour today, tomorrow you can be in his favour if you play ball. We're in the middle of trade negotiations. And I spoke with some people here in Brussels and Washington as well, and the people don't really understand why now, other than that context. And to see what's going to happen is, the ambassador doesn't have a long time left in Washington. When his replacement comes, perhaps there's a window where Trump decides he'll show favour and restore the status as well. Technically, it doesn't make a lot of difference. It's a bit inconvenient, but at the moment, it's not a big deal.
Is this about the EU, or is it about, because it was an Obama decision to elevate actually?
Yeah, I think we should get, this only happened in 2016.
It did,
the EU was elevated, and it took years of negotiations on behalf of the EU with the US State Department to get it. So it is a relatively new thing. I don't think anyone was terribly up in arms when they didn't have it pre-2016. But Brian's right. Clearly, is this a political move by Donald Trump? Yes, it is. Has he been outspoken against the European Union? Yes, he has. Has he been in favour of Brexit? Yes, he has. Will he use this as a bargaining chip? Potentially later on down the line, almost certainly. But is it a slap in the face to, the United States closest
how should the EU react, actually?
Quietly.
No, that's why I'm saying, frankly, I don't
you don't want
this
to
will move. Because what is at stake is the relationship between European Union and Europe and the United States. And this is a long tradition of two entities with common ground on values, democracy, an idea of an open world.
But in the diplomatic world,
this is the problem, though, is because all these values that we hold are the opposite of what Bannon and Farage and Trump hold dear. So this is straight out of the Steve Bannon, Nigel Farage playbook. discredit the institution, devalue the relationship, and change the world
order. But then if the EU doesn't stand for those values or react in some way, does that send a wrong message? Or?
Half these guys are going to prison sometime in the next year.
We are confident enough about ourselves to say, well, we know our values, our principles. We know that our relationship with the United States is a long-term relationship, and we are pretty confident that whatever the president, this kind of common ground will be respected.
All right, on that.
Essentially, just hold forth until someone else gets elected.
Exactly.
All right, now if you are from Germany, then chances are you know exactly who our next story is all about. He is the longest-serving member of the European Parliament, but rumor has it he could be on his way out. Let's take a look. 1980, Margaret Thatcher had just come to power, the Rubik's Cube made its international debut, and John Lennon was assassinated. But it was also the year, seldom mentioned, that Elmar Brok stepped into the European Parliament for the first time. Working as a lobbyist, an advisor, and an MEP, at 72 years old, he's pretty much seen it all. A stalwart of European affairs, he was a trusted friend of Helmut Kohl and a longtime ally of Angela Merkel. He's sometimes been a controversial figure, but he has seen Europe expand and watched as nations reunite. But now it seems his time at the heart of Europe could be nearing its end. That's after he lost a vote for a spot on this year's election list. Why his CDU colleagues could want him out, we're not really sure. But from some of his colleagues, the message is clear. Don't write Brok off. That's almost 4 decades. Is this an end of an era?
I don't think so. The margin of defeat was small. The mood music today, I think, was fairly positive, and I think this will be turned around. I think journalists will lose more than anybody. Brok is a great character to have in front of a camera.
You're going to miss him, Darren?
Well, I don't know.
We don't know yet.
The last and only time he was on this programme, we had a slight disagreement. He's refused to appear since, so I don't know whether I will miss him or not, but he clearly is a character. He clearly has been around for a long time, and I think in part this is a reflection of the diminishing power of Angela Merkel, because as rightly noted in that little report there, they have been very close allies.
They have been. All right. Still to come on Raw Politics. What do you think about the American stump to Europe? In just a few minutes, we are opening our phone lines, so do stay with us, and we want to hear from you. Your call is coming up next, and here is how you can get in touch. We will have a preview of tonight's topics right after the break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Your call is coming up next. We have got some interesting issues we will be discussing this evening. And still with me is Maria Joao Rodriguez. We also have Brian McGuire and Darren McCaffrey. All right, Darren, tell us what is happening on your call.
Some of the issues that we've been talking about this evening, not least of all this issue of Brexit and who is responsible for it. Is it simply down to the British public and the British people and British parliamentarians? It is their mess. They have to sort it out. Or do the rest of Europe and Europeans and this Parliament and everyone else have to take some form of responsibility and potentially, even at this 11th hour, have to be part of the solution? What do you think? Is that true? And also we're going to touch on this issue of the protests that we've seen in France. And in addition to that, we're going to be looking at Trump and what he's done, this change in relationship, how Europe should react to that. Should Europe stand up and kind of give Trump a slap back? Or should we, as you were suggesting just before the break, actually stand on the moral high ground and say that we're better than that? But ultimately, it's not about us talking about this. It's about you joining in at home. Let's bring up the numbers and the contact details that you have. As I say, you can call us there on that number, which is 00800 333 3702. You can email us, and please do, rawpoll@euronews.com, or use that newfangled technology of social media. You can tweet us, use the hashtag rawpolitics, or indeed talk to us via Skype, again, using the username rawpolitics. So please do get in touch. We're going to be on immediately after this programme, and essentially we want to hear from you. Now, before the break, I think I was talking about how me and Elmar Brok might have fallen out, and we didn't ask you for your response. What are you going to miss him after 40 years?
Well, I must tell you, as a colleague, that is appreciated by most of the members of the European Parliament. It's someone with really a long track in the Parliament, but also in European politics. So I don't want to bend into internal politics of Germany and CDU. But I need to say now that, yes, we recognize him as a very valuable member of the European Parliament.
You're going to miss him, and you're going to miss him.
And, yeah, just a quick note on all the topics that you also mentioned today. What would you like, people would be calling in, giving their opinions. What are you expecting when you listen to people's opinions? Hoping to hear from people.
Regarding whatever?
Yeah, the topics that we've been talking about today.
Well, I must say that the way for Europeans to react to Trump's last provocation, I think this is a very important issue. Because we Europeans, we need to decide how we want to deal with this. What should be the tone? And I'm arguing the tone should be a tone of confidence. Because we are an important entity at world level. We need to be treated like that. We have many assets, and I'm pretty sure this is also recognized by the majority of American people.
It'll be interesting to what people will be thinking about, all that as well.
But also, I think, Brian, for you, you're from Northern Ireland.
I am.
Worst case scenario, there is no deal with Brexit, though, but that means that there will be a hard border in Ireland, and it means that the Irish economy is, well, very, very, very badly damaged. Essentially, the backstop, the insistence upon it by the Irish, could actually damage Ireland most.
For all the reasons that you mentioned, I don't think that there is any possibility of a hard border. Okay. And I do think that there is still a long way to go on this whole process. We always discuss about the referendum. I still think we're in that direction. But this issue is not just about Ireland, it's not just about the UK, this is about the whole of the fabric of the European Union.
Do you think there's any change in what Irish people think about all this?
The Irish people?
Yes.
The Irish people are moving towards United Ireland, and I spoke to a lot of people about this over Christmas time as well. There is a real fear that violence will return if there's a hard border. For this reason alone, I don't think that's even on the radar. And the process towards United Ireland, we will see a vote within 10 years. And the process of managing violence is the key thing.
And I think what I'd be interested to know, what people are actually thinking, is why is there so much anger in Europe? I'd like to know what people are angry about. I mean, wouldn't you like to know?
Yes, of course. I understand that people are angry with several things which are not working. Example, we know there is a real climate change issue.
Sure, so
we need to come with a credible answer. But the credible answer should not be translated into raising taxes for those who are less
Sure, so there's really a lot of issues that can come up for tonight. So your call, right after the show, call in and let us know what you were thinking.
Get in touch.
All right, now before we go, an old political cliche, this is one called baby kissing. Most politicians do it on the campaign trail in a bid to garner public support, but it seems that old habits die hard for this former leader. Take a look at tonight's for a moment.
How you doing, sir?
What's her name?
This is Paisley.
Give me Paisley.
Oh, she is 7 weeks. She was born on Veterans Day.
Oh my goodness! Thank you.
You can't beat Donovan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. He's a great dad.
Appreciate you.
Baby kissing on a campaign trail.
He's still such a cool dude, isn't he?
He is.
I know,
it's Barack
Obama.
It's refreshing to see it, and it's hard not to have nostalgia for the former president.
And that was such a nice sequence there. All right. Now, as we mentioned to you, we were talking about earlier, your call is coming up next, and we do want to hear from you, your views of what you think about all the topics we talked about. Here is how you get in touch by phone. You see the number on your screen there. Take it down. On Twitter, you can use the hashtag #RawPolitics, and by email, rawpoll@euronews.com. So all the details on your screen right now. We really would like to hear from you. You can also go on Skype. Yes, no excuse. It's all out there. And you can also get in touch with me. I'm on Twitter, Tessa Ercilia, or at Euronews, and use Raw Politics as your hashtag. Again, stick around because your call is coming up next.